In this episode, I talk with David Edward about the lost civilization of Atlantis. David is an author, researcher, former Army intelligence, and was part of the team that arrested Manuel Noriega. He holds 3 master's degrees and a PhD in engineering, owns 2 companies, and has written over 40 books, both fiction and nonfiction. Those who know anything about Atlantis know it's a mystery and there's a ton of misinformation about it. For me, there are 2 fundamental questions that I want answered. Did it really exist, and what happened to it? Dave's latest book, Atlantis Found, The Final Definitive Proof, attempts to answer these questions and is the basis for our conversation. I hope you enjoy this topic, and thanks for listening. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm really excited to hear about what you have to say about Atlantis. As I said in the pre-recording, I'm a little bit on the fence about it. I'm not 100% a believer, but I'm not 100% skeptical either. I think there's I think there's a really good reason to have conversations about Atlantis, whether it's real or not. And I want to kind of get into that with you a little bit as well.
Well, and it's interesting. The name of your channel, Dead Hand, obviously you picked it for a very specific reason, and there's a whole history to it. With Atlantis, it's kind of the same thing. And what's going on right now with Atlantis is about 3 weeks ago, a documentary series came out on Netflix by this guy Graham Hancock, who's kind of the main voice in the ancient history, alternate ancient history space, not ancient alien space, but there was something that went on before space, and it's being met with it's being very well received on one side, but on the other side, like there was a newspaper article, I think like in the New York Times or something, that said this was the most dangerous show on TV. How could it be allowed to have aired? So I mean, and all he does is he just basically says, there might be more, history might be older than we think, and here's all the things that make me suspect that. Yeah. But yeah, culturally, a lot of people like it. I love it, but it's almost becoming political, if that's even possible.
So I've heard the arguments of why conversations like that can become dangerous, and really, it kind of breaks down to the basic argument that if everything was human created, if all of these natural ecosystems were created or influenced by humans, then it's okay to demolish them and use them for our own means. That's what the argument is.
Oh, I've never heard that argument. That's interesting.
Yeah. And whether it has weight or not, I don't know. It's a good argument, but I don't know if it's actually true or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I've not heard it. So I'm trying to process that as we sit here and talk. I mean, for me, when I look at kind of the history that we've been taught, and then you just go with your eyes and you just look into the world, it doesn't all line up. And it seems like we can look pretty easily across different ancient locations, and we can see things all over the world that look kind of the same-ish. Mm-hmm. Not exactly the same, but it'd be like if all the carts were on the right-hand side of the road. We haven't found that, but I mean, it's that kind of stuff, and the building techniques and all of that. And it just seems like that they would be developed 19 or 27 times independently, exactly the same, all at the same time. Doesn't feel like the right answer. It might be the right answer, but it doesn't feel like the right answer. So I think that's where anyone that digs into this themselves, they start to discover that what they were taught in school maybe isn't exactly right. There's an example I use. There's this guy, Francis Orania. He was a explorer. He's one of the first Westerners to traverse the Amazon River. He went, and this is like in 1542, something like that. So like 50 years or so after Columbus. And he traversed the whole river, and he came back with a report that it was amazing. There was, advanced civilizations and all this stuff. And they didn't manage to get back for like 100 years. When they got back, it was all jungle. So history books for 500 years have slandered this guy and said he was making it all up. In the past 5 years with LIDAR, we found all the stuff that he claims was there. And I think that's like the perfect example. So the mainstream historical view for 500 years said this guy lied and went back just to get money to Europe, when it turns out he was telling the truth the whole time. So he was ruined, and his legacy was ruined. But now we know he was true. And it took 500 years, and it took LIDAR for us to find that. And I think that's rampant everywhere.
Yeah, when you were talking about his discoveries of advanced civilizations, it just made me realize that there's kind of a misunderstanding about the term advanced civilization. And
Yep.
can you explain that as bring it up to a realistic term for people to understand?
Yeah. So when that word "advanced" is used, and let's talk about it with Atlantis. So let me just set up. So Atlantis comes from this guy named Plato, and it's a history that I've traced all the way back. You can get back to about 600 or 6000 BCE. It was destroyed in 9600 BCE. And Plato tells us the Atlanteans were advanced in a couple ways. He says they were very good with agriculture, and a lot of the dialogue is just talking about how their agricultural prowess and stuff like that. In fact, they can grow stuff, and being good at agriculture in 9600 BCE or anciently, it's basically the understanding that there's a crop cycle, the ability to impact the flow of water. Right? 'Cause that's what it all comes down to, is to be able to do that engineering, and which involves moving Earth, generally. But so the Atlanteans were advanced at that, and according to Plato, he liked the way they had organized themselves. They had what he thought was a very simple but good organizing structure. When we use that word "advanced" just generally to refer to this civilization that we think we can see fingerprints of back in the past, usually the technology level that they seem to be at is maybe where classical Athens was, or maybe classical Rome. Although Rome might be a little much, but they're organized. There is a society. They're able to specialize, which is a big deal. So you can have someone who just makes shoes. You can have someone who just cooks meals. You can have someone who hunts. You can have someone who farms. All the things we do to have a society. They clearly had a ruling structure. They clearly had laws. So for 11,000 years ago, that's incredibly advanced. But that's what advanced means. It doesn't mean nuclear submarines or UFOs or death ray crystals. Now, those things might have existed. I have no idea. There's nothing. None of the research I've done has come across them, and I pretty much start with Plato. I start and end with Plato, and he doesn't mention them. Oh, he mentions some kooky things, but he doesn't mention nuclear submarines.
Yeah, and where it really loses context is that people are comparing advanced to today's technology, not to 11,000 years ago.
Yeah. The one interesting thing about advanced is it seems like when we look at whatever these cultures were, they do seem to have been around. They seem to put a lot of thought into what they did, and so they went down a road that seems very different than our road. It seems more like, instead of technology and electricity and that kind of stuff, it seems like they're much more in tune with the harmony of things, with how the earth worked, the ability to move things that we think are heavy. Doesn't seem to have been as hard for them with different tools, that kind of stuff, which is what we seem to aspire to, right? We desperately want to be in harmony with the world. And which is another reason why I find the resistance to what we're finding when we look back in the ancient past. It seems to be exactly where we want to go. So why do we ignore it? It's just, and it's full of the whole space is full of these weird contradictions and this weird resistance that you're constantly up against.
I want to get into a lot of that.
Okay.
First, I want to go back to a little bit and dig in a little bit deeper to I'm still going to call it a theory.
That's fine.
Your theory kind of hinges on the idea that Plato's writings about Atlantis were factual.
It more than hinges on it. One of the things that's important. So I use a modern scientific methodology when I in my book and in all the research that I do. And when you do that, one of the important things is to identify any assumptions you have. And so I created a new YouTube channel. It's called A History Of, and I'm creating videos that outline this. But what was the point? I lost
your hypothesis based on Plato's writings being real.
Yeah. So I went through, and it's like I try to have conversations with people, and one of the first places I found where there'd be a disconnect is some people would just think the whole idea was made up, or it was too ancient, and it didn't matter what I said or what I found or what I pointed to in writings, because it couldn't be real no matter what. So I put as the first assumption to my work is I assume that the parts of the Platonic dialogues that Plato tells us are true are true. That's an assumption, and that way. So what we're really doing,
but you also present a pretty compelling case that what he was writing is true. Can you explain?
Yeah,
that? You did a real good job on your channel, and I want to encourage people to go to your YouTube channel.
Have you
check
seen
out those videos?
Good. Yeah, good.
That, I mean, you spell it out in a couple of short paragraphs, and it's really like it's hard to argue once you have learned what the way you put it. It's hard to argue that Plato's writings were factual.
I know, which frustrates some people. Some people get very frustrated the way I've done it. Sure. But this is the only way to do it. If you want to prove something, you got to lay it all out. And we say don't disagree with my conclusion. Let's look at all the evidence led up to it. And when you do that, people they get exhausted because it does kind of suggest it's true. Here's basically the premise: that if we're going to assume it's true, then we're going to do the analysis, and all the way at the end, we can look back and we can say, you know what? Like 98% of the physical things we could measure out of what he tells us about Atlantis, we have found. Mm-hmm. Therefore, our assumption that it was true has held. So it is true. That's part of the work I'm doing in those videos and stuff that you're talking about. Now I know the end of the story. I mean, I've done all the work, so I know it all lines up. And I think, people like Occam's razor a lot, which is just, get all the noise out of the way, and that whatever the simplest solution is probably the right solution. I watched this guy, the Critical Drinker. You ever heard of the Critical Drinker on YouTube?
No.
He's I don't know how to describe him, but so the drinker's razor is that when presented with multiple options, people will always choose the stupidest one, which I then apply to the criticism that I get, because I listen to the criticism, and there are some very legitimate things that we could discuss and criticize, but I tend to get what I tend to get instead is the superficial criticism that if we were having a real conversation, we would have worked past. So I think all those things come into play, and when you do that, when you do treat these two dialogues, Critias and Timaeus, when you treat the parts he says are true, because he in the dialogues the characters say, I believe this is true, and which Plato never does. He's just the opposite. Mostly in his dialogues, what they do is they say, imagine there was a cave, imagine this, imagine that. But when we get to Atlantis, it's like, no, this is true, and all the characters agreed to believe it. So I've started with that, and it lines up pretty good. And there's all kinds of measurements. The first one, which is in and of itself a miracle, is the date that we get from the Platonic dialogues, because he tells us
that's important.
It's important, and it's if he was just randomly picking a date, to have picked this one. So this guy Solon went to the Temple of Neith at Sais. Sais was the Egyptian capital in Plato's time. It's in the Nile Delta. It's on the western side of the Nile Delta. This temple of Neith, it had been around since before the first dynasty. So it's what they call pre-dynastic. The first dynasty in Egypt was like 2900 BCE. And what really denotes the dynasty, Egypt was around before that, but that's pretty much when they started writing stuff down. So that's kind of where the historians have said, okay, well, that's the line we're going to use. But it goes all the way back to, I can trace it all the way back to 6000 BCE. Now, you know what? This is the second time Andrew, I forgot what I'm talking about again. I've got to do a better job.
Yeah. So you were talking about Solon. He went to Egypt.
Oh, the date. Yeah. So, and the priests tell him that this is their ancient history, and it happened 9,000 years before they're explaining it to him. So you had 9,000 and 600, you get 9600 BCE, which is a miraculous date, because it is the end of the last ice age. It's the end of what they call the Younger Dryas event. And it's the end of the Younger Dryas event. We know the Earth's temperature rose somewhere between 2 days and like 6 months or a year. It rose like 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is insane. So we were in an ice age, and then all of a sudden something happens and all the ice just starts massively melting. So we know there were earthquakes. We know we lost the sea levels rose 400 feet, which now people have said, well, if you're standing on the beach and it's raising 400 feet over 6 months, I'm not going to get surprised by that. And it's like, yeah, but the Earth might, because you've got all that weight, where the ice is, and that's now that weight is shifting out, to the rest of the planet, the oceans and stuff. And then we know that the tectonic plates and stuff shift. So when that weight shifts, the water weight shifts, if a plate shifts, you get tsunamis, and you do lose pretty quickly the coasts. So that date, and that's the date we get from the dialogue. And it turns out there are 3 Dryases. I had to look up. I didn't know what a Dryas was. A Dryas, it turns out, is a flowering plant that does really well in cold weather and higher elevations. So what happens is when they go and they dig through the strata, they see how far down back they are in time, and how far down they dug. They see how many of these plants they see, and then they can kind of figure out what's going on with the Earth's temperature. But for him just to pick that date out of air, how could he know? How could they have known? So I think that's absolutely incredible. The other piece of information that's just absolutely mind-blowing and resets how you think about what was going on is I mentioned that that this guy Solon went to the Temple of Neith at Sais. That's where the Atlantean history was stored. It was chiseled into the walls. It was physically chiseled into the walls of this temple. And we know where this temple is. We know where Sais is. The temple is gone, but the ruins are there.
And just for context, how long before Plato wrote about it did Solon go to Egypt?
So Solon went in 600 BCE. He took a bunch of notes. He says he took a bunch of notes. And then when he went back to Greece, he kept the notes. He was actually going to write like an epic poem, like the Iliad or the Odyssey or a play or something, but he never did that. Then those notes got passed down in his family. So he had a son who I think his son's name was he had a brother whose brother's name was Diopedes, who had a son named Critias, who had a son named Critias, who had a son named Critias. So we get these successive Critiases, and then one of the dialogues is called Critias, the other is called Timaeus, and there's a Critias in both dialogues. But when you weed through it all, the Critias in the Critias dialogue is this guy called Critias the grandfather, and he had Solon's notes and he studied them. He says as much. So yes, it's passed down through time, but it's not like a phone tag game where it starts off as Peter bought a can of Coke, and when it comes back around, it's something completely different. We know that we have the 9600 date from Plato. We know that the cult of Neith formed about 6000 BCE. We know that at some point the temple was built, and by 3000 BCE, before the first dynasty, it existed. In fact, there was a medical school, very famous place, and it was a repository for all this knowledge. We know that the history was written in stone. We know Solon went at 600 BCE and recorded it. Then we know Crantor studied it. He told it to Plato, and then after Plato. So when Plato died, what Plato's really famous for in his time is he created the first university called the Academy. When he died, there were 2 guys up for the job of taking over running it. One was Aristotle, who we all know, very famous and a very brilliant man. The other was a guy named Crantor. And I don't know the politics of it, but Crantor got the job. So Aristotle kind of pouted off, and he went up to Macedonia, and he became the mentor for Alexander the Great, did all kinds of great things, brilliant guy. This guy Crantor was so enthralled with the Atlantean story that he went back to the temple at Sais, and he verified the data and the translations and everything. So we know that whatever is in the Platonic dialogues is at a minimum what was on the walls of the temple, which we know physically date back to about 3000 BCE. We know the Neith cult goes back to 6000 BCE, and then we're starting to get back into the realm of Atlantis, which is 9600 BCE.
So in that, you've established this really strong case of chain of custody, from where Plato got his information, and it was actually verified that information is real, and then there's some cross verification that you've done based on what Plato has written and what you've found. We'll get into that in just a minute because that's really interesting too. Before we go any further on your hypothesis or
It's
your
that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
uh,
Hypothesis. Andrew, that's
okay,
fine.
your examination of this.
My,
Um,
my, my literal truth. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
exactly. So whether it's a myth or fiction,
Mhm.
it's still I think it's a really important topic for people to talk about. Um, in your opinion, because I know you've been asked the question probably 100 times, what got you interested in Atlantis? But I want to put that question. I want to wrap that question in a little bit of a different way. So, why is it important to so many humans, to so many people, to examine the idea of Atlantis? Why is that so important to so many people?
I think this is I would have had a very different answer 5 years ago because my life experience would have been different because we've all just lived through the past 3 years where we got a chance to see that the world might not be exactly that as presented to us, to say it. It turns out what as people, what we're very good at, one of the things we're very good at is identifying patterns. And we have this built-in logical mechanism when we see these patterns. And almost instantly, even without thinking about it, it's handed to us by the time we're consciously thinking. Our instinct is something it fits or it doesn't fit. I've got a painting in my house when I come in the front door, and it's like an abstract paint. It's like, literally someone just took a brush and I see different things. Like I see robots and I see a bull and I see a spaceship. I see, and I see different things. And I don't know why I see them, but they're already there by the time I look. So then when you take that to what we learn in school, and then once we get out of school, when we start looking at the world for ourselves, like I think I opened with this, it just doesn't line up. That whatever this mechanism is that we have, it doesn't line up to what we're being told about ourselves, about our past. And I think many of us, not everyone feels it. Some people are very comfortable uh, snuggling into the current view and proclaiming any question of it is ridiculous and it is things are only as they know. But that's not the majority of people. That's the minority of people. And I think it's just we're all just like, and then we start to think, okay, if our instincts are that there's more there, why are we being told there isn't? And why is there so much energy around squelching people asking questions?
Hmm.
And then people get interested. And then the other side of it could be really cool, right? A whole other civilization of people. What did they do? What did they think? What were their stories? So I mean, it's intriguing.
These are a lot of the questions that came to my mind when I started looking into it. Which, by the way, I was never really interested in Atlantis. I, to me, it was I had pretty much written it off.
Okay.
I had seen some documentaries about if it existed and stuff, and a lot of the documentaries put Atlantis in a way different location than what you say that it is, and we'll get into that.
Yeah, well,
Um,
a lot of documentaries have travel budgets where pretty good looking people get to scuba dive a lot too.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we can try and figure out why they're looking in those places.
I mean, see, my own understanding of Atlantis was it was a city, state, and possibly a continent in the middle of the Atlantic, and it sank. That was my understanding of it. That's pretty rudimentary, I admit, but I didn't really look past that because the literature, the documentaries, everything points to it's don't even bother looking past that because it's not even real. That's what the majority of the academic papers say.
Which is amazing. If you've seen some of the early videos I've done, when you dig into it at all, it's so obviously based on real history. That doesn't mean that history is right. Just because these people believe this was their history, we're not anointing it as true. But we're going to start with the assumption that they're not blowing smoke up our dress or whatever you want to use. And you're right. If you put your pinky toe into the Atlantis pool, the very first thing that happens is all the piranhas pop their heads up and try and encourage you to not do it, to go somewhere
Right.
else. Don't think about it.
Don't look here. There's nothing to see.
Yeah,
Look
and
look
isn't
somewhere else.
and that's weird. Why do they care so much whether we look? It's just weird. And
Yeah.
look, I've gotten messages, man. I've gotten I don't know. I used to say they were death threats. That's overstating it a little bit. They're very mean messages that suggest if I weren't around, life would be better for these people.
Mm.
Um, it's just, you know, Atlantis. Some people believe. Well, I had one guy. He called me, and this is I used to have my phone number on the website because it was a company site. And he said, "Why are you doing this?" I'm like, "What? You know, what? Who? What? Huh?" And he said, "You know, he had done a regression, and he in a past life he was an Atlantean. Matter of fact, he was the assistant scientist that was running the power crystal." Um, when it all went crazy, and he was trying to warn them, but you know, and he's like, you know, it's like this is what it was, and you're saying something different. It's like, why are you taking this away from me? And I don't know, I don't know what to say. I'm like, you know, I mean, you just stumble through the conversation. It's like, but he took the time to call me, and I'm not even a name. I mean, I'm barely anybody in this space right now.
Mm.
And yeah, it's crazy the what you have to push against to have an
Yeah.
opinion that's not it's baloney.
Since we're talking about that, I was going to get to that a little bit later, but yeah, um, let's talk about that right now. What pushback have you gotten from the academic community? I mean, like personally, no,
Yeah,
rather than just you know academics saying that Atlantis is a fiction,
yeah,
and this is everything we know about it. But have you personally experienced any kind of pushback from?
quite a bit, quite a bit. Now
Okay.
remember, I'm not a academic professional. I was president of a university. I know that world. I've been in it. I'm not currently in it, so I don't have a reputation that I'm too worried about. Um, but I, when I first started putting this together, I went to a geochemist that I know. I worked a channel, and I got to the dean of philosophy at Yale University. I had a physical anthropologist from King's College in London, and I sent them pieces of information. Like the lady, the Yale person, was a expert on Plato, and, you know. So and I was corresponding with them all with and miraculous, wonderful conversations. Like the geochemist, I'm showing them some aerial photos of where I think, you know, some of this place was, and they're telling me all kinds of stuff. They're telling me the ground was covered in evaporites. You know, it's a weird grid pattern. All this stuff. And then as the more we got into it, I started asking questions. Well, do you think this could be like farming technology from, you know, like 9600? And they started to pick up on those elements, and every single one stopped returning my phone calls. Or like the geochemist, she was just like, no, I don't, no, can't be, no. If it was any of that, they would have already found it. She's like, nah, that would put modern farmers just, you know, it's just so three different people all stepped away. Um, you know, because of it. I didn't even say Atlantis to them. I just started to push, you know, I think they have a sense though when you start to go for a particular time period. Yeah.
I think that is more. A lot of people would speculate that is there's like some kind of conspiracy. Like these people are told to squash any ideas that go outside of their little bubble. But I think it's more of a case of human nature that if you challenge somebody's paradigm, they're by nature going to push back because if you break that paradigm, then they're lost and they don't know what to do.
Well, and that's a good point, and that's interesting because when you're having what feel like honest conversations with people that are kind of skeptical, a lot of what they'll say is, "Well, you know, no, if it were real, you know, mainstream academics, whatever that means, mainstream, you know, we would all accept it." And I try and tell them, I said, you know, I've first off, the funding. All this academic funding, it's not like there's a bunch of people in white rooms and wearing clean clothes and they're going to go seek truth. I mean, all of this funding comes from someone who's looking for a particular output. So that
Mm,
absolutely
true.
influences what's going on. And
Yeah,
they,
money talks
well, money
definitely.
talks, but then if you're an accomplished historian, let's say, and you've been teaching for 20 years, and maybe you figured out that the Greeks like to use left-handed widgets for some, you know, whatever your thing was, and then all of a sudden, what you're saying is not only challenged, but there's evidence that you've been completely wrong in your entire career. What? but you're the established one. What are you going to do? Are you going to protect yourself and keep your living and your reputation and all the things you like, or are you going to go, yeah, all right? Oh my Lord. I really screwed this one up. I'm going to step aside. You take my chair. You're just not going to do it. It's just not human nature.
Yeah.
And that's what we're up against, which is we have people who get paid for waking up who are anointed as the keepers of knowledge. And if that knowledge changes, then they're no longer the anointed keeper. Someone else is. Simple as that.
And the tragedy of that is that new knowledge coming along gets suppressed for decades, possibly centuries. It eventually comes out. In my opinion, all knowledge comes out in the end, but that knowledge can be suppressed for a long, long time.
I think that's right. I think that's what we see. And then the challenges with history is, with some of the other sciences and engineering, a new idea does have to kind of ripple through everything, because you're talking about, physical objects or how we interact with things or how we build stuff. But with history, a new idea, like if all of a sudden it was accepted that Atlantis was real, 9600 was real, 9600 BC was real, it changes everything. It's not a slow ripple. It changes everything.
Yeah.
Now, I think what it does is it provides us a platform to stand on to look even farther back. That's why I think it's important, because right now that's about as far back as we see. But I think there's a whole world beyond that.
Well, there's obviously, because if 9600 BCE is the end of Atlantis, then where did it begin?
Right.
You really got to go back and ask that question. And that's one of the listener questions that I had. Do you have any idea what the answer to that might be?
No, I am. So, I mean, my approach, what I did is I took the Platonic dialogues and I read them. In fact, I had them on audio, and I just played it for like 3 months in the car. All I did was listen to them all, so I knew them. I learned them front to back. I did the research. I got into it. I found that it was reasonable to assume that Plato is giving us real history. And then I'm trying to prove that he's giving us real history. So I'm in a very narrow lane,
Mm-hmm.
Now, once I get that proven, I can start looking around, but I'm still working on, on that piece of it.
Well, I think you've done a pretty good job of presenting your case. Have you independently confirmed any of that? Has anybody else looked at this and said, yeah, this is right?
Well, I've got a guy I work with, David Stig Hansen, and he was just there. I think this thing is in West Africa. We haven't got to where I think it's this Rishat structure thing. And he was there for the entire month of October. And I worked with him, picking places to go and finding things to look at, to get pictures of, and all that kind of stuff. So I think, that physical part of it is important. But
so from the beginning, the first part of your argument that Plato is his writings are factual. Have you submitted that to anybody for overview or review? Okay.
No, it's like peer review.
Yeah. Do you plan on doing that?
What I'm doing is I'm opening the information up to the public. Like, I'm on Reddit a lot, and with these videos, I'm putting the ideas out there because I do want these ideas vetted. But I'm not really interested in going into an academic environment where where their goal would be to discredit me or my work because it saves them. So instead, I'm throwing it out there to people like me. And I've had lots of course corrections based on the feedback I'm getting, which is a lot like having it peer reviewed, because you get all kinds of things. But I think that's a better way to do it. I think it's better to open this up to the public and then go through a Q&A process where you listen and adapt, but hold to your course as long as that course remains valid.
Right.
I've had papers that have been submitted for peer review, and I've been a peer review. In fact, I was the editor for the academic journal of the university, Aspen University, in like 2009 or 10 or something like that. I know that process top to bottom. I think that process is very good for specific things that can be tested. I think big ideas like this, I'm not even sure what you would submit to who and who the expert would be.
Yeah. When I was preparing for this interview, I did come across a couple of papers. I didn't read them. I just looked at what the summary of those papers were. The majority of them were that Atlantis didn't exist. So I think you're right. You would be submitting it to an audience with a predetermined outcome.
Right. Well, and like one of the I'm up against this argument all the time. They say, well, Plato made it up. And so, I mean, if you've seen any of the videos or seen the works, like, well, hold on, oh wait, let's talk. Why do you think that? You know, and we try and talk through it, and it's not a real conversation. They just decide it. Well, you know, it was passed down for thousands of years. You know, they could have said anything, that kind of stuff. And that's what when you take your foot. The other problem with the academic world is something like this. This is a big idea. They don't do well with big ideas. They all specialize.
Right.
So you've got someone who is an expert in the soil and composite topology of West African mineral refinement from 1850 to 1937. How's that going to help me with it? You know, I mean, and that's all. And even you go back in the past. In fact, I purposely put myself there. I've taken graduate courses on this. I took a graduate course on, you know, classical Greek history and stuff, and I knew way more than the instructor. They you know, these guys, they teach 5 classes with 50 kids each, and the curriculum's kind of handed to them. They don't know. So who is it you would go to is the other problem. Yeah.
I agree. And putting it to the court of public appeals, I guess, is what you're doing.
Yeah, that's the way to do
it. You know, and find some collaboration within a community that's already been doing the work.
Well, look, I mean, like, as an
the
example,
only danger I can see with that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
the only danger I could see with that is where you get into you fall into the trap of having an echo chamber where you throw ideas out there and other people say, yeah, that's what I was thinking too, and then you may be going down a blind alley and neither one of you can really see what's on the other side of it.
Yeah, that doesn't happen too much in the Atlantis space because the mindset is that Atlantis is a single place, even though I argue that it's actually, we're told it's 10 places in the dialogues. But so like right now, the big war in Atlantis land is between people that think it's the Azores and people think it's the Rishat structure. And they hate each other.
That's weird.
I know.
So yeah, I don't understand that.
We're constantly undermining each other and criticizing each other, and poo-poo and all that stuff. And
the important thing is the truth, not whether you're right or wrong. It's
right,
the truth.
Right.
But get to the truth, right?
My point, and there's like 10, actually there's like 12 legitimate places that people are passionate about thinking were Atlantis. And so if you think it's one, you've got 11 different points of view that are going to attack you. But which is good, which I think is good. For example, there was a guy on Reddit I argued with a lot, and I still think he's an idiot. But he kept telling me Atlantis was Malta, and I kept saying, dude, it's not Malta. That's stupid. It's this little island. It's inside the da, da, da. And now I'm going through all my videos. I'm like, okay, people think it's Malta. Let me do the research because I'm going to do my own research. And I'm like, okay, it's not Malta based on what I know about Plato. But oh my Lord, Malta is a crazy place, man. I mean, they've got so many ancient. For a long time, they thought the oldest constructions in the world, the oldest man-made constructions in the world, were on this little island, which is in the Mediterranean, just south of Sicily, in Italy. But it's got. I don't know if you know, Malta. It has over 150 locations where there are wagon tracks that are worked into the bedrock, not just dirt. And they're thousands and thousands of years old.
I didn't know that was Malta, but I knew there was a place that had that.
That's Malta.
Okay.
And they can't figure out exactly where they're going. And a lot of them just lead off into the sea. Just go into the water. So when I'm doing my research, I'm like, one of the things I do is I have a flood map, and then I take a location and I lower the water 400 feet. Because that's what it supposedly was last ice age. And everywhere I go, it's not that big a deal. I mean, Florida is kind of a big deal, but I haven't got to that analysis yet. But like I said, I'm doing Malta, so I lower the Mediterranean 400 feet. Oh my Lord, Malta completely changes. It's no longer a little island. It is a big, like, peninsula hooked landmass connected to Sicily, and it becomes like this big place. And then there's islands. I don't know how to say it. It's like FIRLAN. I don't know what it's called. I don't know what it's like. Starts with an F, and it's to the south, and it's like sticks out there. It's maybe, I don't know, it's maybe a couple miles to the south. When you look at the flood map, that would have been a peak, like a mountain peak, and a lot of these cart paths head in that direction. So so I think what we've got there is ruts from when the sea level was lower, and the only time the sea level was lower was at the end of the last ice age, which was 9600 BC, which is when Plato tells us Atlantis was destroyed.
So, and the question, and this is going off the topic of Atlantis, more or less, but the question I have about that is, those ruts are like 3 or 4 feet deep.
In some cases, not
In some
always, but in
places,
some
yeah.
cases, yeah.
So that means that those, if those were made by carts, carried by, you know, donkeys or whatever, that would have had to be centuries to be able to dig those ruts, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, a tremendous amount of time. The other thing they don't find by those ruts is the classic beast of burden tracks in front or to the side or anything. So they clearly see the ruts, but it's not like they can and then point to the tracks, where the animal was pulling it or whatever. They don't know what powered it. Um,
And were they using the wheel at that time, or was it just like a sled?
I just had this argument uh, 3 hours ago. Because yeah, there's two points of view. One person has noticed that the North American Indians used a sled with there were two big poles kind of came off the back and they tie stuff to it, and that would leave drag marks kind of like what you see on Malta.
Right.
They also, when you look at them, they just look like wagon wheel. I mean, it's just I lived in Colorado for 10 years. You just get like the Santa Fe Trail. You just get used to seeing that, and that's what they look like. But they're all over the place, so they're just very hard to gauge. But um, Plato tells us that the Atlanteans, when they invaded into the Mediterranean, they made it as far as, and I don't know, I can't. It's like the Tetrahana Sea, whatever they call the water right there around Malta. Plato tells us the Atlanteans made it that far.
Hmm.
It's one of the only places where the name is still the same. And so I'm like, okay, well, I gotta, just like we were just talking, I'm not submitting for peer review. They wouldn't give me any of this information, but I've got to listen to people. I don't know everything. So this guy likes Malta. It's named in the dialogues, and it's starting to exhibit interesting characteristics. I mean, there's temples and megalithic construction there like you wouldn't believe. So when I'm doing that analysis, I'm taking all that into account. And then the question I'm saying is, was this one of the provinces that we're told about? Because we get 10 names. We get the names of 10 rulers, one of which was Atlas, who was the king of the capital. And then there are 9 other places that have names we just got to find.
The next part of your theory is that the location of Atlantis was actually in a landlocked, what's now a landlocked uh, location in western part of Africa,
Yeah.
which is counter to what a lot of theorists claim it to be.
It's counter to what almost all of them claim. Yeah.
So we'll get into where you can talk about where that was, but what I want to know is, how did you come to find that location?
Okay. Well, I didn't. So I was, I'm an old guy. I'm looking. Your beard has a lot less gray in it than mine. You'll get here. But so I'm an old guy. I can't sleep. As a kid, I loved all this stuff. So one night I was flipping through YouTube, watching stuff, and it offered up a video by this guy Jimmy Corsetti on a channel called Bright Insight, and it was an old video. This was from 2018, and I was doing this maybe a year ago or so.
I know the channel, by the way.
Yeah.
Good channel.
Well,
I like that channel.
I like it too, and I've talked to him. I reached out to him. I've talked to him, and his videos went viral. With they've got millions and millions and millions and millions of views, and he's pitching this location. And I listened to it, and I was like, "Wow, I think he's onto something." I didn't agree with everything he said. I do have a background in this stuff. Not only am I well read, but I've taken graduate courses in ancient history, and I really am very well read and interested in it. So I knew he got like he mispronounced the name Herodotus. He showed a map where I knew there wasn't really a map. Just little stuff, but his overall case was pretty good. So I'm like, you know what? Let me see if I can help this guy out. He's not asking for my help, but I think if Atlantis has been found, I think that's important. So I went and I started re-familiarizing myself with it, and I came across this line right here, which is my unique contribution to this. The line is, this is from the Platonic dialogue called Critias, and the guy Critias is talking. He's explaining Atlantis, and he's saying the country immediately about and surrounding the city was a level plain itself, surrounded by mountains which descended towards the sea. It was smooth and even and of an oblong shape, extending in the one direction 3,000 stadia. And I was like, that is a weird statement, because all through this, the city is in the capital is is where they're explaining from. So everything is, you start at the center palace and you go 50 stadia in the city. I'm like, 3,000 stadia slope to the sea. What, that seems to suggest something that's different than everything I've ever heard. So then I had to go figure out what a stadia was. And it turns out we're using what they call the Alexandrian measure. and it's 606.9 feet, but I just do 607 feet because we're not in exact land. So you multiply 3,000 times 607 feet, you get 1.8 million billion something. You divide that by 5,280, which is a mile, and you get rounded, you get 345 miles. So I just went to Google Maps and I measured how far the Rishat structure is from the coast, and it's 345 miles. And that was where I said, holy shit, this guy's not, that turned me. I'm like, okay, now let me look. And then I spent maybe 10 days just doing, I mean, I barely slept. I just did nothing but go through the dialogue, break all the pieces out, and then look. And that's where I kind of came up with that proof that you call a theory, and I call a book.
So let's talk about that Rishat structure. First of all, can you spell that? Because I don't know how.
RICHAT.
RICH. Okay.
And anyone, if you're interested, just type it into Google and then go to the images. And the first page is just a million images of this thing. And the other thing, this Rishat structure, it looks like Atlantis. It's the only place for any documentary you've ever seen that actually looks like what's described. It's got a center island.
So I will agree to that and say when I first saw that, I saw, I don't know if it's on one of your videos or I saw it on an interview that you did, but that picture of the Rishat structure, it like embodies the image in my mind.
Yeah.
That I conjure up when I hear a description of Atlantis.
And when you go back and read Plato and him trying to describe it, he's trying to describe something like that. And it's the only thing on the planet we've ever found that looks like that. We found like people like Santorini because it's got a center island and then an outer ring of land. But Plato says there were two of those. Mm-hmm. He also tells us that after the cataclysm, it was the waterway was blocked by a shawl of mud. People mention this. But if it's an island in the middle of the Pacific, or the Atlantic Ocean is not going to be blocked by a shawl of mud. It doesn't make any sense. So it's got to be something that can with like a river or goes between two mountain peaks, something that can be constrained, and then all the dirt from Atlantis, when after the tsunami came in, got pulled back and it clogged up the waterway. Now, and then I don't know what you've seen of mine.
So wait, before you get into that, I want to go back to the Rishat structure, because the first thing I thought, because we were talking about Atlantis, was, that looks exactly like Atlantis from what I've heard it described as. But then I thought that also looks like a crater.
Yeah, for a long time.
Because it has these eccentric rings coming out from it.
Yeah.
Either a crater or I think you said that that it could also be a collapsed volcano.
The current consensus, I believe, is that it's a collapsed volcanic dome.
Okay, collapsed volcanic dome. Not a meteor strike or
for a long time, people thought maybe it was an asteroid that it hit or something, or comet. A comet would leave different, but that was the original belief, and it doesn't seem to fit in the volcanic dome. And there's volcanic activity in the area. Mm-hmm. So that seems to be the consensus. And by the way, we don't need either one of those for it to be Atlantis.
No, I agree. I was gonna say that also, that even if that is how that land feature was created, that doesn't mean that it didn't kind of build up with topsoil and waterways.
Yeah,
over centuries, and then people came along and migrated and populated that area.
So we know a couple things. We know Plato tells us that the center island had hot and cold springs. Well, that screams volcano.
Yes, absolutely.
And then he tells us that.
Have you ever been to Yosemite?
No, I've driven by it.
Yellowstone.
Yellowstone, yeah. No, I've driven by it.
Yeah.
I never went. But and then the other thing he tells us is they had to dig a canal from the outer ring to the inner ring, 100 feet deep and 300 feet wide. So the reason why you do that is because silt collects, right? Because the rain's coming down, the water, So we know there was at least, if they dug down 100 foot, you don't dig into the bedrock, you dig down to the bedrock. So we know there was at least 100 foot of topsoil.
And that's all there is now is bedrock, right? It's all down to bedrock.
There's another line here. This is from the Platonic Dialogues. He's trying to explain the aftermath of one of these cataclysms, and he says the country immediately about and surrounding the city was. I'm sorry, that's the one I just read. Wait, here we go. The earth has fallen away all around and sunk out of sight. The consequence is that in comparison of what was then, there are remaining only the bones of the wasted body, as they may be called, as in the case of small islands, all the richer and softer parts of the soil having fallen away, and the mere skeleton of the land being left.
Yeah, that's a perfect.
If that's not describing the
Rishat
Rishat structure, right? That's it.
I mean, from my perspective, it is.
Yeah.
Uh,
but here's the big thing. So this Piri Reis map, I don't want to lose the thought. So if you look at the Piri Reis map, and again, you just type in PIRIREIS into Google, and then there's all kinds of consternation on the left-hand side and the bottom side because they say it shows more about the New World and right. But there's also the coast of Africa.
Just to explain what that is, that's a map that was written or drawn in the 1400s. 1500s?
It was drawn. So Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. This was like 22 years after that. So 1510. I should memorize the date. It's like 1510s ish. And it was Piri Reis was a Ottoman navigator, and he commissioned a map made from all of the ancient maps that they had, but he wanted it all boiled down into one map. And there's all kinds of problems with the map because you are trying to, whoever did it, it was trying to take things that and figure out where they went. So like I think the Amazon River is in maybe the opening the mouth is like in two places instead of one because they were trying to reconcile the maps. And then some of the criticism is that some people think that like it shows Florida and then it shows Cuba, but some people think that really that was a map of Japan. It's going the wrong way. But then when you get down to the south, that's where it gets interesting because when you look at South America, what the map seems to show is the water 400 feet lower. So it seems to show the continental shelf from South America as it wraps around to Antarctica. Now, some people say that, no, that's not what it shows. Just the people that made it were idiots and they ran out of space. So they just kind of hooked it around on the bottom. So, like, okay, one of my other assumptions is, by the way, is that just because you lived, 10,000 years ago doesn't mean you were an idiot. So the idea that they're idiots, that would be one of my last conclusions versus one of my first. But anyway.
So what's that drinker's theory?
Yeah, drinker's theory. Yeah, when confronted with multiple choices, people will always choose the stupidest one. But anyway, I just want to. So on this map, if anyone can go look, you look at the African coast, you look where the Rishat structure is, and there's a kooky little city sitting in a ring of water up a river where there's no river. This is the Sahara Desert today. And it was the Sahara Desert when the map was made. Yeah. And that river is blocked by a bunch of mud, right? Where there are big mud piles on the coast of Africa. So, I mean, it's clearly the memory of whatever was there. And there it is. It's on the map. Again, we cannot like it, but there it is.
So even if it wasn't a city, even if they were showing that Rishat structure with those chunks of...
They drew a castle. They drew. If you look at it, they drew. It's a castle, and it's sitting in a ring of water up a river. So how is that an accident?
Look at that Piri Reis map and study it, and look at the west coast of Africa, and you'll find that little inlet, that water inlet leading up to a circle.
Yep.
And
there's a big duck. There's an elephant and a duck.
But if that was made in 1500, and that was basically cobbled together from ancient maps, somebody in 10,000 BCE or around that time drew a map.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so one of the things about Atlantis that I have heard is that they had a really strong navy. Is that accurate?
We don't know that. It seems to allude to that. There's a line that gets ignored. I don't understand why this line is ignored historically, but when the priests are talking to Solon, they tell him, hold on, I've lost my train of thought again. I apologize. This doesn't happen, but I guess it's because it's the end of the day. What were we talking about?
We were talking about the map,
right?
Piri Reis map.
Piri Reis map, yeah.
And then I asked you if they so that map was cobbled together from ancient maps. So somebody
Oh,
from
okay.
10,
I'm sorry.
9600
I
BC. You
parked
had
these
to.
points away. Yeah, yeah. And I just okay. So what the priests tell them is that the way to Atlantis, they say it's outside what they call the Pillars of Heracles, which we think is the Strait of Gibraltar. But they say the way to Atlantis is also the way to the opposite continent, and there is an opposite continent. I live on it.
Right.
But this is from priests in 600 BCE talking about a history from that was written down in 3000 BCE, and they know about an opposite continent. So this suggests all kinds of things. There's not a lot
Okay.
more in there. I mean, the whole city is built for boats. He talks a lot about bridges, and they built them so like one trireme can go under them and all that stuff. He says that when the Atlanteans attacked Greece, they came from the sea. That suggests boats. And then he talks about Atlantis being the way to the opposite continent, which suggests boats. But it eludes, like, it almost like takes for granted the maritime nature of the society, but it doesn't really talk about it beyond that. But it suggests, and so people have blown that way up. They've blown that up into saying that, well, in order for this to work, the Atlanteans would have had to have naval capabilities like the Portuguese from the 1700s. It's like, I don't know about that.
Mm.
But here's just you talk about inconsistency. So there's an island called Crete, which is kind of the southern. It's an island, but it's part of Greece, and a lot of people like it as a location for Atlantis. I don't. I mean, it doesn't fit. But they had a Minoan culture there. And the Minoan culture is very exotic. It's a bull-oriented culture and all that kind of stuff. But when you start to do the history on that island, we can get an agricultural society all the way back to 7000 BCE. So we're getting darn close to Atlantis time period anyway. But this island of Crete, had been occupied for like 130,000 years.
Wow.
Well, even when you drop the water 400 feet, there's no land bridge to this thing. So how do you reconcile people were there 130,000 years ago? They didn't swim. It's not, no Olympian could swim to this thing. Maybe an Olympian could, I don't know. But, I mean, you're not loading up your dog and your kids and, your household supplies and swimming, into the middle of the Mediterranean, right? But no, how'd they get there? And then, you ask these questions to the people they're supposed to know, and you kind of get weird answers of, maybe they made a log raft.
Hmm.
Well, wait a second. You tell me I'm not supposed to speculate. Did they or not? Do you know or not? I had a conversation with a guy earlier today, and we were trying to agree because he kept saying there's no evidence for any of this. And I kept asking, what would you consider as evidence? And he couldn't. It's always squishy. I said, what about the wheel? Can we, that's like the most foundational principle to society ever. Is there a mainstream view of the wheel? And we don't know. It's like it's an easy invention, and it was invented anywhere between 2400 BCE and 7000. It's just all squishy. And it's like, what's even the point of the conversation? Because you're just making it so we can't ever decide anything. It's just weird. So,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
I think it was a rant, but I don't know.
Okay, so anyway, that map brings up a whole different conversation. Maybe we'll save that one for a different time.
That map's the key. So that map's the key. You look at the Pyrrhus map. There's a city where the Rishat structure is surrounded by water. It's just what Plato describes. And then the last one is Herodotus. It's another guy that wrote. He wrote actually 100 years before Plato. He mentions the people called the Atlanteans in Libya, the remnants of a society in Libya. So you can start to triangulate this stuff, and it starts to be something that seems to have been known in Plato's time.
Yeah, that's really interesting that these people, these Atlanteans, did you say that was, what year was that?
Herodotus wrote like he wrote like 100 years before Plato. So the 4th century.
So he's talking about people in 3000 BC.
He's talking about people probably a couple hundred. What Herodotus is doing, he's the first guy who tried to be a historian for real in the Western tradition. So he wrote this thing called the Histories, which is viewed as the first real attempt to write stuff down. And the first third of the book or so is like a travel log where he just says, okay, you leave from Greece and here's everything we know about the world. He kind of walks you around it. And when he gets to Egypt, and his stuff is like, okay, you go to Egypt, then you head west for 10 days, then you head west for 10 more days. And, so it's that kind of stuff. There's no physical drawings. But when he takes you into Libya and he starts approaching the Atlas Mountains, which is an interesting name for the mountains of Morocco, because Atlas was the king of Atlantis. When you start approaching those mountains, there are people that call themselves the Atlanteans. And they're weird people. They don't dream. They refuse to write down their names. They won't let you write down their names or their king's names or anything. They don't eat animals. They only eat vegetables. They spend their days cursing the sun, and they live on piles of salt. And these are people that existed.
I just, you probably can't answer this, but maybe you could speculate a little bit. Why wouldn't people write down their history? If you had the ability, or there was somebody willing to write it for you, why would you refuse to have it written down?
Yeah, look, I mean, I could only speculate. If these people are the remnants thousands of years later of a society that was destroyed, then maybe we can just assume some type of religious or whatever overtones came, because maybe they were really good records keepers, and then they got blown up, so they decided that
Oh,
that the gods got mad at, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
the big thing for me is they spend their days cursing the sun, and every theory. You mentioned comet impacts or asteroid impacts, or there was a tsunami in like 2011 or something in Japan. That tsunami shifted the Earth off its axis by like 10 inches.
Yeah.
Right. So whether it was something internal, whether it was a volcano, whether something hit the planet, if our axis did shift to 23.5 degrees, it shifted, it would seem like the sun's doing stuff, and you might blame the sky because that's what you see. The sky goes bonkers. Everything you have is destroyed. You survive, you curse the sky, right? Because that's what you blame for. I'm not saying that's what it is, but if I'm speculating, that's how I'm trying to line up those ideas.
So this happened at the end of the Ice Age.
Yep.
Could this all have been like because the sun heated up so much that it melted all the ice, and this caused the calamity?
Yeah, it could be, which is why I don't try and I'm not a ancient historical sun geologist or comet impact theoretician or anything.
Mhm.
So it could have been solar flares. I see that theory. It could have been the Earth passed through a comet tail. Could have been asteroids. Could have been just massive volcanoes. And it could have been anything. But it happened. Whatever the cause of it was, the result of what happened is not disputed by
Right.
anyone.
There's geological evidence to support
yeah.
the idea that happened.
Well, we know the Ice Age ended, and we know when it did, and we know that the temperature rose like 30 or 40 degrees within half a year or less. We know that. We know all that. We don't know why. There's theories as to why.
So again, I want to encourage people to go to your channel. What is the channel?
On YouTube, it's A History Of.
Okay.
But you can always go to frequency99.com. That's the publisher website, and there's a link to the podcast and all that stuff there. Yeah.
I'm not wrapping it up just yet. I just
Okay.
I want to interject that a couple of times so that people understand that there's a ton of this information in depth in video format to check out.
And I just launched the channel about 10 days ago. So anyone subscribing or letting the videos play would be tremendously helpful. It's very hard to get a new channel launched.
Yeah. Well, I'm a subscriber.
Well, thank you very
happily.
much.
Yeah, and it's interesting. But so taking a step back, I guess back to modern day and how the study of Atlantis is so controversial, but also so important. Why do you think your approach to solving this problem is so different than how it's been for so many years, for so many people?
Yeah, people ask me that, and I get variations in that question. I'll get questions like, "What makes you so much smarter than all the other people that have looked for this?" That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that using a modern methodology, I haven't seen done before. I haven't seen anyone lay out their assumptions and then kind of lay out, what it is they're looking for. One of the things, if you watch the videos, is I spend a lot of time on videos where I'm saying, we just got to figure out what we're looking for. If we're going to start looking for Atlantis, we have to define what we're looking for. And there's a city, there's a continent, and there's a kingdom. And so I go through the dialogues and I say, here's the checklist of what it would mean for us to have found Atlantis, right? But I do that before I look. So a lot of people, I think the people that do the TV shows, I think they have a different goal. I think their goal is to get on TV and have a nice travel vacation. And I don't think they're really trying to solve it. I think it's important. And I am very lucky because I have to work. I own 2 companies, but I own them. So I can allocate my time how I want. So I can, 3 o'clock, I can do a I can do a podcast or whatever. You know what I mean? So I have the time to do it. I'm interested in it. I have a very unique background. We haven't talked about my military experience. I mean, I was in the Army. I was part of the team that arrested Noriega. I was a counterintelligence agent, so I have all kinds of what they call battlefield counterintelligence training and information collection training. So I've got kind of that physical real world side of it. But then I've got doctorate in engineering. I've got 3 master's degrees. I spent time in the academic space. I was president of university. I've got, so I'm pretty well rounded when I come at this, and I don't know that the other folks that have looked at this have always come with that kind of background.
If your hypothesis does turn out to be true and becomes widely accepted, what does that look like, and what does that mean for the world?
I think what it means for the world is that all these suspicions we have about the Aztecs and the Mayans and Easter Island and Stonehenge and all these places now have context. They have historical context, because right now they're mysteries. There's dozens and dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of locations, and in every single one we have to turn our brains off and pretend it was all built within the past 1,000 or 2,000 years. And I just think if we can accept that that's not the actual history of things, I think we're going to start noticing those patterns I mentioned, and we're going to discover that we have a much richer history, and we've done many more things than we ever thought.
Mm-hmm. And according to some people, that could be a dangerous scenario.
Yeah, I didn't write the newspaper article. I mean, they, this guy, Graham Hancock, who's got a loud voice, they are flooding in with massive criticism of the guy. And if you really dig into it, he's just basically asking the same questions. He's like, he's saying, go look at this. This doesn't look right. We should probably try and figure it out. And his basic premise is that, our history might be older than we think. It's not dangerous at all. But there's if you go back, if you're making $250,000 in salary a year and you basically don't have to work, you've got lots of time to defend yourself, and that's what we're up against.
Yeah, well, and it's not necessarily dangerous to the majority of people, but it could be dangerous to academia.
That's what right. It is dangerous to them for all those reasons we've already talked about, because
exactly.
they could be discredited. Because remember, in their mind, they're not only the smartest person in the room. In their mind, they're probably the smartest person on the planet. Yeah. And so you get a room, you get 100 professors in a room. 95 of them are sitting there thinking that they're the smartest person in the universe and the room. Yeah. And it's just an amazing mindset.
That's wild.
Yeah. I know these people. I've had them report to me. I've had hundreds of them report to me.
If okay, so if it does come out that your hypothesis is correct, Atlantis did exist, it was wiped out, and we can figure out what wiped it out. What wiped them out?
Water, clearly water.
Yeah. But was it a tsunami? Was it was it brought on by massive rise in ocean levels? Is there a comparison that can be drawn between the downfall of Atlantis and societies of today?
Not by me. I know, this isn't a biblical study. I'm not looking for morality in this, which is important because it's there. It's there to be found. And it lines up, Atlantis lines up like a lot of the stories we have where the society got unmoral, whatever word you want to use, and so that's why it happened. I have no opinion on any of that.
Maybe that's why they didn't want their history written down.
Because of good parties, they're having good parties. Yeah. So party in town. I don't know. Could be.
Okay, so a couple of listener questions that I put this out to.
Okay.
Was there is there potentially any treasure or artifacts that can be excavated once this?
I think so. Okay. So. So what? So there's a couple things. There's the Rishat structure itself is beaten to bedrock, and then a couple hundred years ago. Literally. There's nothing left there. And then a couple hundred years ago, the French Foreign Legion was in that area. So there's a lot of French Foreign Legion forts that are kind of built on top of all of that. Mm-hmm. So what'll happen is someone will find that and they'll say, "Oh my God, I found a building from Atlantis." And then people will go, "No, it's only 150 years old, so there's nothing." But put all that aside. So there's 2 locations that this guy David Stig Hansen and I have found that show massive sprawling agriculture. and it's under the sands of the Sahara. So I'm not going to tell you where because we're still working on that. But that's going to and it's covered in what they call evaporites, which is the salt. So if the ocean water comes in, the ocean recedes and evaporates, it leaves salt, right? The climate changes from a temperate climate to what we have now, the desert, 130, 140 degrees. That salt cooks on the top of the ground, and over hundreds of years, it turns as hard as a rock, and the place is covered in that. But I mentioned the pre-Reese map. If you look at it, you'll find the river, you'll find that kooky little city in the ring of water, and between it, there's a big duck. And right by the duck's head are these mounds of mud. And Plato tells us that the waterway was blocked by shoals of mud. He tells us it was the topsoil from the city. And if you look at West Africa, you can find those clumps of mud up where that waterway would be.
Is it still mud, or are these like hills?
It's piles of dirt now, but it's like huge, hundreds of feet tall. They look like hills, but it's just dirt or mud. It cooked mud. That's whatever was there. Enough remnants of it will be at that location if we were to dig, that we would start finding stuff.
Nice, man.
And they found tons of stuff. It's all consistent with our understanding of what they call the pre-pottery Neolithic, which is the time period that we were in. So they're not finding pottery because this is before we figured out you could cook dirt and make pottery. But we're finding a lot of stone tools and a lot of stone, like vases and objects and just stuff made out of stone, which is what I think we're going to find. Atlantis, I think, from an advanced standpoint, is going to be on par with Göbekli Tepe, which we briefly touched on. So I think we're just looking for a Göbekli Tepe in the desert. These tools we're finding are consistent with that. We know the area was occupied. The other thing we know from the topology is if it's raining, with this Rishat structure, it would be in the middle of a big lake. And I mean like a big lake, like maybe 20 miles or 30 miles across. And it'd be an island with a radius of almost 6 miles. So it's almost 12 miles from side to side. If you're a person and you see that, it's a fantastic place to go live. And we know there were people there, and we have an assumption that we can't assume they're idiots just because they lived before us. So I think a much harder explanation is to explain why Neolithic people wouldn't have found this wonderful place and started living on it, because they're sheltered, they can grow stuff. The saber-toothed tigers can't get to them. No one can attack them. It's a wonderful place to live. So why wouldn't they live there?
So just another question that I forgot to ask you was the size of Atlantis. Mm-hmm. You said did you say it was 5 or 6 miles across?
So he gives us all kinds of dimensions. Some of these have been confusing, but he tells us the center island was 5 stadia across, which is about half a mile. You multiply 607 feet times 5, you get whatever, 3,000. About just a little more than half a mile across. Then he tells us there were concentric alternating zones of land and water, basically concentric circles. He tells us they had to dig a canal from the outer ring to the inner ring, and that canal was 50 stadia. So you do the math, and 50 stadia is like 5 and 3/4 miles ish. So that's the radius of the thing, which is exactly the radius of the Rishat structure. Then he tells us that they built a road from one side, and then from the other side, they built that channel I mentioned for the boats. And then when they cut the rings of land, they cut on the outer ring, they cut 3 stadia, so 1,800 feet. The inner ring, they cut 2 stadia, so 1,200 feet. And then the center one, they cut 1 stadia, 600 feet. And we can find the outer ring, we can find that cut. We can find that 1,800-foot gap that's been cut out of the bedrock. So all those pieces start to line up. He tells us other things, basic things. He says there are mountains to the north, and it was open to the south. Look at the Rishat structure. There are mountains to the north, and it's open to the south. I already mentioned, the waterway and stuff. He mentions, King Atlas Mountains. We've got that in Morocco, a couple hundred miles to the north, and it goes on and on and on. There's a whole bunch of data points. Pretty much anything physically measurable that he gives us, we can find there, and we can see it. Anyone can see it. You don't have to have me explain something to you. You can just go look.
When this information becomes like widely known, not that it's not already, but when it becomes like on a mass media scale, where it's commonly believed that your hypothesis is accurate, and people start flooding the area like treasure hunters or ad hoc archaeologists, what's preventing that from happening? Is there laws in place to?
Oh yeah, the country is Mauritania. it's first off, it's a brutally inhospitable place. I mean, this really is French Foreign Legion, endless sea of sand, 140 degrees in the shade. I mean, it's just a brutal location. Coupled with that, the government of Mauritania has laws that they will, through a government sanctioned tour in country tour guide, you can have someone drive you out to it, but you're constantly monitored. They usually, the tour guide's part of the government, and then they'll usually have one or two police cars that stay about 200 or 300 feet away that kind of follow you around. You're not allowed to bring a drone. There's 7 checkpoints between getting into the country and being at the Rishat structure. At every checkpoint, they're going to take something from you. So what we do is we bring like cheap drones, like $200, $300 drones, or they tend to like big camp knives. So we'll bring 10 or 12 camp knives, and then we that's what they confiscate at each of the locations. But yeah, I mean it's just hard, and this is, I mean it's a Islamic country. There's a lot of rules. God forbid you should like put a rock in your pocket and get caught with it at the airport trying to get it out. So I don't think there'll be a rush like that. In fact, and even to get into the country, you have to coordinate through the president's office. This guy, Dave Stig Hansen, that's what he had to do to get there. So it's it's not like the U.S. where you can drive to Colorado and go to a camping store and get equipment and go start digging holes. It's more brutal than that.
What did the people? What is it? The speculation. What did the people look like?
I have no idea. He doesn't mention what they look like.
But there was there was a record of people calling themselves Atlanteans.
Yep. He doesn't say they have black skin, white skin, red hair, white hair. The other thing is, I have to not have an opinion about that, because what will happen is if I say they're purple, then people will start accusing me of being a purple nationalist, and propagating purpleness.
You're right.
Yeah. So it's not mentioned. It's not important. Honestly, it's not important at all to anything I'm doing.
They could have been caveman art. They couldn't have been Neanderthals, could they?
I think they could have been.
Really?
There's although Neanderthals, we're talking Neanderthals theoretically were pretty much died off by then. This is pretty recent. 9600 BC is actually pretty recent. But there is a ghost DNA strand that is in the people of West Africa still to this day. It's not disputed. This is academic science, and it goes back 50,000 years, and they can't identify who the people were. So I think when you look at DNA, we know we're told all of us came out of Africa. So I don't know why we would then expect not to find the first advanced civilizations in Africa, number one. And number two, the people in the region have DNA that has stuff in it that we don't know what it is.
If they were to excavate those mounds, those mud mounds or whatever, do you think it's possible that they could find bones of the people from that existed at that time?
I don't know how long uncared for human remains last. If they last 11 or 12,000 years, then absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what they're going to find. I just go back to Göbekli Tepe, because Göbekli Tepe is technology from this exact date, and it's not that far away. So it's kind of basic, rudimentary, not even really megalithic construction, but construction with blocks, with rocks. And then it seems like they had a writing style. They mention a plaque they had in the center island that had their laws and stuff on it. So I think we would find a Stone Age society that seemed pretty well organized and had lots of stuff.
Yeah, I think anything that is found is going to be exciting.
Yeah, well, another part of my theory, because I'm going for the grand unified theory of Atlantis, is I want it to fit into current academic science. So and it can not 100%, but it can like 75%, and then we just have gaps we got to fill in. But we're way closer with what's known in academia, not what's concluded, but what's known. The support for this thing is practically everywhere, and that's in these videos. That's what I'm doing. Like, for example, the fact that Crete was occupied for 130,000 years. Well, that suggests they could get across water. So don't tell me boats weren't invented. I mean, because your own science is contradictory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all the questions I have. Is there anything that else that you would like to add to the conversation?
Um,
I know we haven't talked about your book. I want to give you a chance to talk about that, where people can buy it. I'll include a link in the description of the video. Um,
yeah, I mean, I think we've covered it all pretty good. Yeah, I've written like 45 books. They're about evenly split between fiction and nonfiction. I consider Atlantis nonfiction. Some people might disagree with that, but that's how I've listed it.
I'm kind of leaning more towards the it existed. You,
I think
you
I,
have me semi convinced.
I always say I'm like the Grinch who stole Christmas, because our whole life Atlantis has been this giant Christmas box with just the most bestest wrapping paper and bows on it. And it's under the tree, and we've been staring at it forever. We finally get to open it, and we open it, and it's tube socks and undershirts, right? Because that's what we need. So it's real, it existed, but the answer is much more rudimentary than what we had hoped. It's not a flying car, you know.
Well,
So
looking at it from a person from my perspective who believed, who didn't really even give it a second thought.
yeah,
I think it's more exciting than that. I think
okay.
it's an ancient civilization that was believed, that most people believe never even existed. If we find out that that's true, that's incredible in my mind. A amazing Christmas gift. So you're far from the Grinch in my mind.
Okay, well, good. Well, good. You're the first one who's thought that underwear and socks were a good gift.
Yeah. No, I can always use an extra pair of underwear or socks.
That's how I am. Right. I mean, I can use more of the stuff, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. So the name of your book is Atlantis Solved. Is there a subtitle to it?
Oh yeah, the final definitive proof. And the book is a proof. I try and warn people. It's not a narrative. It's not a story. It's a proof. So basically, it's a brute force. It goes through. It sets the context. It identifies. It introduces you to the dialogues. It decomposes them, and then it does all the analysis against the measurable pieces, and it reaches a conclusion.
I
Yeah,
think your YouTube channel is a valuable resource, and anybody who's interested in the book should get the book, but also check out the YouTube channel, A History of.
yeah. A history of, yeah. Because I'm going to do multiple things. The first season is Atlantis, but I'll do something else in season 2. But so the first one is a history of Atlantis. But yeah, the channel is A History of. And I think the videos, I'm working really hard on them. I think they do a very down to earth, grounded, easy introduction to this thing that's very consumable, but also very interesting.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned your background briefly. I didn't get into that because I wanted to dig right into the material of Atlantis. But if you're willing, I'd love to have you back on at some point in the future to talk about a lot more of the stuff that you've actually done and some of your other books, if you don't mind.
Sure. Hey, I did. We can talk about I did the jungle training school in Panama. It's 10 days. At the end of it, they cut the head off a boa constrictor and you got to drink the blood. That's how you graduate. I did that. I spent a week in the Darien Gap. I spent 6 months in the Soto Cano Air Base in Honduras. Pablo Escobar was flying DC-9s full of cocaine and refueling them there, trying to get them into Texas. So yeah, all kinds of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I'd love to. And written 500 books or something like that, I heard.
45. It's still 45 is pretty good.
No, that is a lot, man.
500 is my goal, but 45, yeah. So
this is just a follow-up to go over a couple of questions that I had after our initial conversation. After spending about 24 hours thinking about it, I thought about the idea of you guys. You've already had one expedition, or
two.
You've had 2 expeditions over there already.
Well, the same guy has gone twice.
I thought he was over there
overly
already.
fancy, but yeah, yeah.
And do you have plans for future expeditions?
We're trying to figure that out. There's nothing else we think we can do just driving around, so we need to start coordinating this. And we have a gap between the people that think there's something to look at and the people that don't. So what we're actually working on is building the context or the case that there's stuff to go look at there.
Did you do any testing while you guys were there previously?
No. But testing is a funny word. There's a lot. No one has done any testing there. You know what I mean? I mean, even universities, you can't do much. We collected some samples because what I'm interested in is the evaporites that are sitting at that spot 10 miles to the north, and then that spot, I don't know, it's like 50 or 60 or 70 miles to the south along that channel we looked at. Because if those are evaporites and it's salt, and we can prove all of that, there might be more information in there that we can learn. But yeah, but we haven't done that yet.
Okay. Uh, I guess the reason why this whole thought process about testing, experimentation, that came up for me was I started thinking about the structure of the Rishat structure. Is that how you pronounce it?
I think so. Yeah, Rishat. Yeah.
Okay. And it reminded me of not only the structure itself, but the surrounding area, that kind of eye-looking section. It reminded me of the Uinta Basin, which is where Skinwalker Ranch is located.
Did it really? I haven't. I watched. Look, I'm familiar with it in that I watched the TV show, and I've watched some YouTube videos and stuff on it. When you say it reminds you of it, give me what reminds you of it?
Well, the first thing that came to mind, like I mentioned earlier when we talked, was that is identical to what I would imagine Atlantis to be.
Yeah, no, that that's it's got that going for it, which is
Right.
it looks like it.
My second thought, on that line of thinking was, it looks like a meteor impact area.
That used to be what they thought it was for the longest time. I mean, all the way back till our lifetimes. More recently,
So where the two correlate is Dr. Travis Taylor, who was out there at Skinwalker Ranch for a couple of years. One of his initial hypotheses was that this whole Uinta Basin may have been created by a meteor impact.
Right.
So, and they're finding stuff under the ground that kind of seems like it could be structural. And I thought, man, if they were doing, if that Rishat structure was covered up, and you were doing like ground penetrating radar, would it look like there was some kind of a structure underneath the ground?
They did ground penetrating radar in 2019. And it's a lady, I forget her name off the top of my head. She's very famous. She's kind of the one that figured out you could use satellite images to find stuff on the ground. So she found a lot of pyramids and stuff in Egypt, which kind of made her. And since then, she's struggling a little bit to still be relevant. She did the Rishat kind of when her reputation was on the decline, not because of anything she's done. It's just we get it, And like I said, they found the Foreign Legion forts and stuff, but they won't release the lidar data.
That's weird.
So they're telling they threw us a bone, which is they threw us what they pointed out things that are obvious, misleading, and uninformative, but obvious, and then we can't see the data. So I don't know if they found. I hear in the wind, I'll hear that somewhere in those results they did find stuff that was underground. I personally don't. I think we're dealing with cavemen. The Neolithic people, smart. They could have. I still think they knew more about nature and all that stuff. They were advanced in those ways, but I still think they were just people, and they had campfires and they stacked rocks on top of each other and put a roof on to stay out of the rain. So I don't know that there's something that's going to be magically found that's going to change that. I think instead, once we accept people lived there at the right time and it fits this story, then we can look at what we already know differently and understand that just Neolithic people, cavemen, hunter-gatherers, because they were on the planet for hundreds of thousands of years before they did anything. And according to our history, it was only 6,000 years ago that they decided to start doing something. So there's a lot of time with something to happen. A lot of the land on the planet has gone underwater that they would have been on because they tended to be coastal people. But I don't think digging holes around the Rishat is going to lead anywhere. I think that mound that you and I talked about farther down, where I think we'll find artifacts, and then the agricultural sites we've identified that go under the sand that are just sprawlingly massive. I think there's stuff to find there, but that's not at the Rishat structure. I think the Rishat structure is just bedrock. It's just like Plato tells us. It's the skeleton of what was of the land.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So some of the other ideas for experiments that I came up with, I'll just run through them because my mind started going into really kind of esoteric, really weird thoughts when I connected it. And really, there is no connection with Skinwalker Ranch. This was my imagination
If
playing
I know
playing
that, but I'm
around.
intrigued if there was, if we could find a connection with something like that, that might be interesting. I
Right,
don't, the meteor, um, that the science has changed its mind on that, and now they think it was a volcano, not a meteor,
right.
um, and that's pretty much the accepted view currently. So
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
So just do, and I don't think it's a really expensive test to do, but check for radiation levels.
Yeah, David, he did take he thought that the magnetic levels might be interesting. So he took
Electromagnetic.
well he said magnetic. I don't
Okay.
know the difference honestly between magnetic and
Well,
electromagnetic.
there's some really inexpensive, like ghost hunters use it.
Yeah, yeah.
ELM or
Yeah,
EMF. Yeah,
EMF, yeah.
electromagnetic frequencies. So they scan for that. So that was the next one that I was thinking. Radio signals, just to see if there's any kind of transient radio signals happening out there.
I mean, all
The
those
reason,
things
the
you can
re-
check for all those things just with a phone. So yeah,
Oh, really? Really? Okay. So
yeah.
the reason that I thought about that is because these gigantic satellite dishes, radio satellites that they use
Hmm.
that are they're receiving. I wonder if that rear shot structure could kind of act as a radio satellite or a radio telescope.
Yeah, I don't know. I know how they work kind of, and I don't know if the current configuration would work, but
Yeah.
with more dirt, it might. But certainly, it's interesting. Your mind, you did your subconscious got a hold of you, huh?
Yeah, it really did, man. I went pretty far out there.
That's good though. That's
Wi-
good. That's why it's so fun. That's what makes
yeah,
this fun. Yeah.
right. So wind speed, humidity, temperature throughout the day to see how vast the fluctuations in that stuff are. That's kind of pretty standard stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Scanning the night sky with night vision goggles
So
to see what's
that's
kind of out there.
interesting. Well, actually, because I mean, Skinwalker Ranch, a lot of the stuff they find is atmospheric. And I will tell you, I don't think anyone has ever stood in the middle of this thing and looked up.
Well, that idea came to me.
Never even occurred to me to until this just said it.
I have a pretty good friend who lives here in Las Vegas who uh, thinks that he saw something unexplainable in the night sky in can't remember. So it was a desert over in um, the Middle East somewhere, and I'm not exactly sure where he was at.
Okay.
But he looked up in the night sky with some night vision goggles, and he saw something that he couldn't explain.
Okay.
And that's what made me think of the night vision. Um,
Well, you know what we can do is we could do some of the Skinwalker Ranch style things, dig a hole and look around, I mean that kind of stuff. Not on any kind of major scale. They won't let us. We can't be digging holes in this thing, but we can certainly disturb the tops. It's not sacred. It's not protected.
okay.
Um, so I
Uh,
like that. I hadn't even thought of that, but that would be very interesting. I agree.
on the same kind of level as that infrasound. Are you familiar with infrasound?
Um, yes,
It's
I mean,
they're sound waves that are below our hearing level, but it can affect the physical body, the
okay,
physical any kind of bio sensors that are in the area. Infrasound can be detected.
okay,
Um, EEG and EKG readings of the human biosensors that are in the area. So you check their brain waves, their heart rate,
okay,
along with their pulse, um, uh,
okay,
their just keep a constant eye. Like if you were in Antarctica, right? They're going to constantly monitor, or you're out in outer space. They're going to constantly monitor all of your readings to see if there's any fluctuations in that. And you could do that pretty simply with there's like these wristbands that you can get.
yeah, Fitbits, yeah,
Yeah, Fitbit. Yeah,
yeah.
right. Um, and then I thought that was the last one. The blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen levels of the human biosensors. that are in the area. Just
Yeah,
keep.
we didn't do that. We certainly could. I don't. Again, I don't. None of these. I mean, the one looking up, I can imagine that one. The other ones, I can't imagine results that'll be very meaningful.
Mhm.
But this that light, but they're easy enough to do. And then if we found some, I mean, it's because they're very low effort. All of those. Between a phone and a Fitbit, I think we could do everything you just said.
Right on.
Yeah.
It would just be interesting to see, like, if is there any kind of range of fluctuations that's going on, and what could be causing it. Is there any correlation between X happening and Y sensor readings?
Right.
Like I said, it's kind of far out there, but
Well, look, Dave's planning on going back.
okay.
I'll shoot these things by him. Why not?
Cool.
And like I said, I like the idea, because I doubt he was out there at night. It wouldn't occur to him. It didn't occur to me. But yeah, maybe going out there at night might be interesting.
So he was not out there at nighttime? Oh, wow.
I mean, because they're all day trips, because he's staying in the capital, and then it's 150 miles he's got to drive. So
Yeah.
it's a standard, everybody gets up in the morning at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. There's all the stuff you got to do. Eventually you're in the car. Pretty soon you're there, blah, blah, blah. You have lunch. You don't get arrested by the cops that are following you. Eventually you come back to the hotel and you plan to go back, to a different location tomorrow. You know what I mean? That's just a rhythm of, like, a job.
Yeah.
And the people that we're dealing with there they're working. This is their job. They're like a little tourist.
Okay.
Saying that brings a lot more structure to what they are, but they're sponsored by their government, and they're allowed to drive people like us around, whatever that means.
Yeah, but being out there at nighttime, I think, would be amazing, because there's zero light pollution out there in the middle of that desert. You could see probably, and then I didn't even think about this, but you could set up a astrophotography. That's kind of what I was thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, we have to stay up there with it, because even though there's no one around, if we left something expensive on the ground, it would be gone.
Other than that, when are you guys thinking about going back out there?
We're trying to figure it out. Like I said, he just got back last month. And he wanted to, I guess he felt like he was a little early. October was a little early. It was still incredibly hot. So I think he wants to go back like in March, maybe February, March.
Would the weather be more comfortable at that time of year?
Yeah, it's less hot. It's still hot, but it's less hot.
Okay.
I mean, it's 90 instead of 140, which.
What are the rules of, like, if you wanted to go out there and stay for a couple of nights just to camp over, are you allowed to do that?
Everything is negotiated. It's an Islamic country. Everything is negotiated through the government office. And as long as you negotiate with them and they say yes, there's lots of things you can do. You'll be supervised. You'll always have the person they assign to you, someone watching them. And then there's always like two people 400 yards away watching the people. And they have said no, but not like a no. It's always, you can't, no, we can't let you fly a drone over it. But some people have done this or that. You can go to this position and look down. So it feels like they're helpful, but everything is coordinated. You're very much at their mercy when you go out there.
Okay, David. Well, yeah, like I said, is there any party thoughts you'd like to
No, I think that's it. Yeah, frequency99.com, or I would really appreciate help with the new YouTube channel, A History Of. But yeah, this is pretty much my stick.
Very cool. Well, I 100% appreciate you coming on the program, the podcast, and sharing your knowledge, and look forward to hearing more.
And very, very professional job. I really much enjoyed my time talking about this. So good job.